The war had raged for decades, but some things were supposed to remain sacred. Even in conflict, certain lines were never crossed. Medical neutrality was one of them. Across the stars, it was an unspoken rule. Hospitals, medics, and field surgeons were off limits. No matter which side they treated, no matter who laid die on their tables, they were to be protected. Humanity had upheld this principle more than any other species. The Interstellar Medical Corps, Earth's most esteemed humanitarian division, operated under a banner recognized in every war zone, on every battlefield. Their only allegiance was to life itself. On Vassus 3, a barren moon turned neutral medical zone, thousands of doctors, nurses, and humanitarian workers treated the wounded of all species. The war between the Galactic Coalition and the Korthan Dominion had left bodies in the millions, and here, in this fragile pocket of peace, they tried to stitch the galaxy back together. The first explosion was dismissed as a malfunction. Then came the second. By the time the third tore through the main hospital, it was clear this wasn't an accident. Korthan warships descended like carrion birds, their crimson hulls reflecting the firestorm below. Panic spread through the medical camps. White banners bearing the universal symbol of peace were raised higher, distress signals flaring across every channel. But there was no hesitation, no mercy. Orbital bombardments flattened entire sections of the compound. Patients, many of them Korthans themselves, were reduced to nothing but ash. Medics ran, hands raised, screaming for surrender, only to be cut down by ground troops who marched through the wreckage. Dr. Elias Grayson, Chief Medical Officer, activated his distress beacon. This is Vassus 3. We are non-combatants. Repeat, non-combatants. Ceasefire. We have Korthan wounded here. You're killing your own. Silence. Then a cold, guttural voice replied over the comms. There are no non-combatants. Grayson knew, then, that there would be no negotiations. He sent out one final transmission, his face bloodied, his voice trembling. The message would reach Earth, though he wouldn't live to see it. They murdered the healers. No one is safe. Then the transmission cut out. Across the galaxy, governments reacted with empty words, condemnations, debates, and hollow threats of sanctions. The Galactic Coalition met in emergency session, arguing whether this was an act of war or an unfortunate consequence of battle. Some whispered that humanity should not have intervened in the first place, that this was a cause of involving oneself in alien wars. Others said retaliation would only lead to more suffering. But on Earth, there was no debate. The moment Grayson's message played before the United Earth Council, every leader in the room knew what came next. The public outrage was immediate, but it was not the cries for war that decided the response. It was the silence, the cold, measured stillness of those who understood that a line had been crossed. A single order was given: release them, deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a place unmarked on any map. Titan Blacksite housed those who were never meant to see the light of day again. It was not a prison in the conventional sense. No cells, no metal bars, only containment, designed not for criminals, but for those who had waged war so brutal, so efficient, that even humanity had chosen to lock them away. They were not traitors. They were not failures. They were something far worse, victors at any cost. The facility stirred as a command was relayed. Automated security systems, built to keep them inside, now retracted. Doors sealed for decades grown open. Heavy locks disengaging for the first time. Armed guards stood by, not as jailers, but as escorts. In the heart of the facility, Victor Cade opened his eyes. He had been left in isolation for 12 years, his mind sharper than ever. A man of lean muscle and a gaze that could dissect a battlefield in seconds, Cade had once rewritten the laws of war. The galaxy had never seen a strategist like him before, and after the things he had done, they never wanted to see one again. He stepped forward as the officials entered his chamber. No chains, no restraints. They were unnecessary. If Cade had wanted to escape, he already would have. A woman in a military uniform stood before him. You know why we're here. Cade smiled, stretching muscles long and used. They broke the rules, didn't they? The officer nodded. They did. Cade exhaled slowly. And now you want them to remember why those rules existed in the first place. No more words were needed. He followed them without question. Elsewhere in the darker sections of Titan, the Red Ghost waited. No one knew his real name. No records existed of his birth, only of his operations, missions so classified that even speaking of them was an executable offense. He was a whisper in the dark, the reason high-ranking officials checked their shadows. Nations had fallen not through war, but through the silent, precise work of his hands. The door to his chamber slid open. "You're being activated," the officer said. The Red Ghost said nothing. He only stood, adjusting the gloves on his hands. His mission had already begun. Further down, past layers of reinforced steel and security clearances, Nadia Voss opened her eyes, the sniper who had ended wars before they began. The last time she'd been unleashed, a nation had ceased to exist in a single night, one bullet at a time. The warden handed her a small case. "Your rifle is waiting for you." She opened it, running her fingers along the weapon like a lover long lost. "Who?" she asked. "The Corthan Dominion." She smiled. "How long?" "Until we say stop." One by one, they emerged, Earth's most dangerous creations, called forth not for conquest, not for power, but for vengeance. They were the ghosts of a darker time, the proof that even humanity had feared what it could become. And now, the galaxy would learn that fear. The Corthan Dominion did not fear retaliation. They expected outrage, threats, perhaps even a few retaliatory skirmishes. But war? No. Humanity was known for its stubborn diplomacy, its tendency to seek alliances rather than destruction. The Corthan general saw the massacre on Vassus 3 as a display of dominance, a lesson to remind weaker species of their place. They did not understand what they had done. The first sign of change was silence. The usual diplomatic channels, where humanity would have protested and negotiated, went dark. No messages, no formal demands for justice, not even a public statement. And then, one by one, Corthan high-ranking officials began to vanish. It started with General Vaxer, the architect of the Vassus 3 attack. His personal shuttle, one of the most secure vessels in the Dominion fleet, was found adrift in space. Life support intact. No signs of forced entry. Every guard accounted for, except him. His body was never recovered. Only a message was left behind, burned into the walls of the cockpit. "We do not forgive." On the same night, Admiral Carthox, commander of the 8th Fleet, was eliminated within his own stronghold. His personal guards were found still standing at their posts, their throats slit so cleanly they hadn't had time to collapse. His quarters were locked from the inside, the security footage cut out for exactly 2.8 seconds. That was all it took. Fear spread through the Dominion's upper ranks. They had expected outrage. They had not expected ghosts. On the front lines, Victor Cade launched his first campaign. The Corthan stronghold at Kelbar Station, one of the most fortified positions in the galaxy, was wiped off every star map within a single day, not through brute force, not through conventional war. Cade played the Dominion's own arrogance against them. False intelligence lured them into defensive positions, expecting an all-out assault. Instead, their supply chains were sabotaged. Their long-range sensors fed them fabricated fleet movements. Ships reported mechanical failures that did not exist. By the time they realized they had already lost, Cade unleashed a final stroke. Entire warships turned against their own fleet, their systems overridden. The station's command corps was wiped, leaving the Corthan forces leaderless, blind, and paralyzed. A fleet of over 300 Dominion warships was reduced to nothing but wreckage without a single human casualty. For the first time in their history, the Corthans experienced what it meant to be truly hunted. The psychological warfare escalated. The Red Ghost made sure of that. Corthan officers began finding messages in their private quarters, handwritten notes placed on their pillows, even in the most secure bunkers. Messages that could not have possibly been delivered. "You were on Vassus 3. We saw you." Some took their own lives rather than wait for what came next. And then there was Nadia Voss. She did not strike with armies. She did not need to. From the shadows, She began to dismantle the Dominion's leadership one shot at a time. Politicians, warlords, high-ranking officers, none of them were safe. The moment a new leader was appointed, they had hours at most before the inevitable. It wasn't just assassination. It was a demonstration, a message. The Korthan Dominion was dying, and no one could stop it. Entire fleets began to retreat. Colonies surrendered before a single shot was fired. Veterans of 1,000 battles, soldiers who had raised worlds without hesitation, refused to report for duty. Fear had done what no war ever could, and it was only the beginning. The Korthan Dominion had never known true fear, not until now. Their war fleets, once the terror of the galaxy, had become little more than stranded, aimless vessels. Their commanders hesitated to issue orders, too afraid that the next command might be their last. Entire outposts abandoned their posts without firing a shot. The Dominion's empire, built on strength and intimidation, was collapsing under the weight of something they had never encountered before, a war they could not fight. The attacks had been precise, methodical, relentless. Cade's campaign had left the Korthan military shattered, their fleets leaderless and confused. The Red Ghost's silent executions had broken the confidence of their commanders, while Nadia Voss had turned fear itself into a weapon sharper than any blade. And then, at last, came the final blow. A single transmission was sent across every known Korthan channel. A recorded message, simple, direct, unmistakable. It showed a face. Dr. Elias Grayson. Not a soldier, not an assassin, not a strategist. Just a man who had once stood in a hospital, offering care to the dying. The very man whose last transmission had started it all. The image flickered, distorted by static, then steadied. He was dead, of course. The Korthans had made sure of that, but the message had been carefully constructed, pieced together from his final transmission and old footage. His voice echoed across the Dominion's networks, a ghostly whisper from beyond the grave. We were healers. A pause. Static crackled. You turned our kindness into weakness. You slaughtered those who saved your own. Another pause. Then the final words, repeated in a dozen Korthan dialects, ensuring that no one could misunderstand. Now, there are no more healers, only hunters. The effect was immediate. Entire sectors fell into chaos. Some Dominion officials, hoping to atone, publicly denounced a massacre on Vassus III, desperately seeking peace before the storm fully consumed them. But there was no peace left to give, because the war criminals of Earth had not just been released, they had been unleashed. Cade led one final campaign, a push directly into the heart of the Dominion's core worlds. Not to conquer, not to occupy, but to end them. The Red Ghost moved ahead of the invasion like a phantom, ensuring that no leadership remained to guide the defense. Nadia Voss dismantled the last of the Korthan High Command with shots so perfect that their final war council died in unison, their blood staining the symbol of their own empire. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Humanity did not seek territory. They did not demand reparations. They did not even leave a garrison behind. The Korthan Dominion was left in ruins, its power shattered, its people paralyzed by fear. And as the last human warship departed from Korthan space, a final message was transmitted to every surviving Dominion system. A simple warning: do not touch our healers again. And across the stars, the lesson was learned.